to the Bielsa Ball podcast with me, Tommy Rocket.
And me, Jeff Edward. Welcome.
Well, it's been another very entertaining week in football. It's a week where we've learned that there is no big six. There's a big seven. Leeds United remain unbeaten at Ellen Road against Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, Man City and Man United. So I think you could throw us in and become a self-acclaimed big club. It's also a week where we found out that Bruno Fernandes is not a fan of the dark after spending almost 80 minutes in Calvin Phillips' pocket on Sunday. And also we found out why Marcelo Bielsa's glasses are crooked, because Patrick Bamford hit him in the face during training a few weeks ago, and he still hasn't got his glasses fixed. We also welcome a bit of a TV legend to the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bryn Law. How are you, Bryn?
Hi. Okay.
So, Bryn, obviously you are the voice of LUTV. You're the voice we've celebrated promotion with. You're the voice we've celebrated every goal in the Premiership with so far. How are you enjoying the season so far?
Oh, it's been brilliant. I've loved it. I'd like to say I've loved every minute of it, which, 1 or 2 minutes maybe I haven't loved, but by and large, 95% of what I've seen and experienced has been fantastic in terms of the football, at the very least. I mean, that the bit, if you take the bit off the pitch, that's been pretty rubbish, frankly. But if you just focus on what's happening in front of you, and that's all we've been able to do, then it's been great, because there's been so much to enjoy. Football's been just fantastic to watch. Even when they're not playing particularly well or the results are not going well, it's still been fantastic to watch. And, what they've managed to do in terms of shaking things up in the Premier League and the way they've done it and the personnel that they've done it with, it's been hugely impressive. Yeah, so it's been, in a strange sort of way, it's been really, really good.
Absolutely. It must be it's a dream job for us doing what you're doing. Obviously, if you can never play for Leeds United, watching every game and getting paid for it and commentating on it must be every
watching every game and what? Sorry, and
getting paid for it.
Yeah,
you don't get paid.
No,
I do. If you have any complaints and you want to step aside, I don't mind coming in and doing it for you if you fancy. So, Bryn,
yeah,
are you a Leeds fan? I suppose that's the top agenda. Now, little birdie did tell me that there was some association with Wrexham Football Club, so I'm not too sure what the scenario is there. Can you tell us who's your team?
Well, Wrexham is the team that I grew up. Well, I was born in. Right, here's a quick potted history. Born in Liverpool, in '69, so was just beginning to really get into football at the time when that fantastic Liverpool team, the one that won the European Cup for the first time for the club, I was just getting into football then. My dad was a football fan. He used to take me to either Goodison or Anfield, whichever he could get tickets for, which was usually Goodison because they weren't as good and you could get in there still. But my team was Liverpool. And then we moved, I was 8 and we moved to North Wales to a place called Wrexham, and my parents, trying to sort of placate me in terms of the move, suggested, well, don't worry, there's a football team in Wrexham. And I said, yeah, the second division football team. And even at that tender age, I could recognise the difference. Can you imagine that Wrexham were playing at the second tier at that stage when I moved across the border? Yeah. So I went to watch them 2 weeks after we moved. There was the first home game. So I went to watch that Wrexham v Blackburn March, whatever it was, 1979. Wrexham won 2-1. And kind of just got a little bit of maybe this isn't quite so bad after all. So I started watching. The next home game I watched was against Sunderland. There were 19,500 inside the ground. The next home league game I watched after that was Stoke. There were 20,000+ inside the ground. And I thought, this is all right, actually. Big crowds. I mean, they lost both of them narrowly, but big crowds. This is proper. So that was me kind of then into the whole Wrexham thing, and that's where it began from there. So, obviously, quite soon after that, Wrexham fell off a cliff in football terms. And those moments that I enjoyed in those very first few weeks of being a Wrexham fan have never been repeated, nor do they currently look particularly likely to ever be repeated either. But unfortunately, I'd made my decision by then, and I was absolutely bloody well stuck with it. So Wrexham's my team. Having said all of that, I moved to Leeds in 1992 and did my first Leeds game. My first Leeds game was the Charity Shield. I worked on the Charity Shield. I'd never even been to Wembley before. So I worked on that game for BBC Radio Leeds, and that began my association with Leeds United. Now, I've lived in Leeds ever since, so I've been in Leeds far longer than I lived in either Liverpool or more particularly North Wales. So this is, my 2 children were born here, etc., etc. So I've been in Leeds for a long, long time now. And obviously I've been seeing the football club since 1992 in varying amounts, but I've been watching the football club. I'll have seen the football club every single season since then. So there is, there's a strong affection. Just put it that way. Loads of my mates are Leeds fans, and if they're happy, then I'm happy. Let's put it that way.
Brilliant. And what a first game to cover as well. A 5-4 winning for Leeds that day. A bit of a mad game that. Or sorry, 4-3. Sorry, bit of a mad game that day.
Cantona it was Cantona. That's right. Yeah, Cantona hat trick, and I think Tony Dorigo, my man, scored, didn't he?
Yeah, he did actually. Yeah.
I was watching the highlights again bizarrely the other day, and it was my first proper job for BBC Radio Leeds, and I was only a cub reporter. So I'd been probably working for a year, all told, before that, and I'd actually done a couple of match commentaries on Wrexham, as it turned out, for a local radio station in North Wales. But this was my sort of entry level. This was like, whoa, next level now. I'm at Wembley. I've never been to Wembley before. I'd actually done the Makita. I'd stood in the tunnel and done a little bit on the Makita the week before, was it? 2 weeks before the Makita tournament with Sampdoria and Nottingham Forest played at Leeds. So that was a nice, gentle introduction, but I'd never been to Wembley. And I found myself, I was the tunnel reporter at Wembley, which is quite a sort of, position of some responsibility. There were crackers giving it to me, given who I was and where I was in terms of my career. And I remember waiting in the tunnel at the end of the game, and I was tasked with getting interviews with the players at the end of the match, and being very, very nervous about the whole thing. And the players were coming off, and I was just trying to, I think I did actually stop Tony Dorigo and get him to do an interview, because Tony was always a nice guy and would always, as I learned from that point onwards, would always try and help out if he could. So well done, TD. I think I probably would have stopped Gary Speed as well, because Gary was from North Wales like me. So he would have helped me out, no doubt. But I also obviously had to stop Eric Cantona. And I just stepped in front of him and said, any chance you do an interview for Radio Leeds? And it was just a straight no. And off he went. And that was my first introduction to the welcome to the big time, my friend. Yeah, not everything goes your way at this level. So off he went. And then after I'd done the interviews, all excited, I've got something on tape here. I then set off to find, there's a little booth they used to have underneath the old Wembley. And it was like the radio production booth. So our team of guys, the technical guys, were working in this little room, sort of in the corridors. And I had to go and find them. And I remember I was tasked with doing it as quickly as possible, because they wanted to get on the radio as quickly as possible after full time. So off I set. And the old Wembley, it was a kind of absolute rabbit warren. Once you got out the tunnel left or right, there were all sorts of little other service tunnels going off all over the place. And I was just trying to find it. I mean, it all looked the same. I was opening doors and it was the wrong place. I could not find this place where our technical guys were getting more and more panic stricken. And I was running round and round and round. And I opened a door and I turned right out the tunnel to go and find this technical place. I then ran round for a bit, opened a door, and found myself 20 minutes later back in the tunnel. And so all I'd done was a complete circuit of Wembley, and arrived back from the other side at the point at which I'd started off, still not having passed them. Anyway, so I remember the fear and the nervousness of that quite vividly. So that was my first experience of kind of
I have visions of you. I have visions of you now. Do you remember the scene in This is Spinal Tap, where they're looking for the stage?
Yes,
and you just walk?
It was very, very similar to that. Corridor after corridor, going into all the wrong door. Oh, I'm sorry, madam, and all that sort of thing. It was, the sick feeling at the pit of my stomach. That I can remember that to this day. So but it was a good way to start when all was said and done. And actually,
just into the deep end, yeah.
Well, yeah, very much so. But so I had a little period then when I didn't do. I went to do Leeds United interviews and stuff, but I wasn't doing any games. And then at some point, I actually turned down the first Leeds United game I was offered, because Wrexham had a big game on the same day, a promotion game. So can you believe that? I turned the Leeds United match commentary down. And then I actually came in to do the first Leeds United game. It was the Youth Cup final against Man United. And we did both legs of that on BBC Radio Leeds. And I shared commentary with a guy called Peter Drury, who went on to do okay. And Yeah, well, we still see each other on the gantry now again, which is nice. But Pete and I shared the commentary for that, so I was the kind of the new voice, and he was the guy who was just establishing what was going to turn into a fantastic career. So that was my first Leeds game, and the first proper Leeds game. I can't remember actually. I genuinely can't remember. I think it would have been maybe the start of the next season, but I wouldn't be 100% sure of that.
Right, that's brilliant. So, like, commentating, it's something that every kid does out in his back garden with his football, and when he's pretending to be his favorite player. And I suppose, like, I dreamed of being a commentator. I would have loved it. That would have been a dream job for me. How did you get into it? Obviously, I read up a little bit about you going to college and stuff like that, and you end up befriending Adrian Childs. And how did it all come together? How do you land a job like that?
Well, there is a tale to tell there in a sense, because when I was that little lad that I mentioned in Liverpool, beginning to love football, it was a soccer mad city, and I played all the time, street, park, the lot, school, playground, constantly. But there was one that I played for the school team. I actually played for the year above in the school team briefly, but there was one thing that I quickly got into my head, and that it was that I wasn't very good at football. And I could already tell that lots of the people around me were maybe not as enthusiastic as I was, but they were better than me at playing football. So that was something that kind of, the penny dropped quite early on. I mean, really early on, sort of 8 years old or something like that. And I actually began to formulate a plan from that point onwards, where I thought to myself, how do I get to watch football if I can't play football or be involved? How do I get to be involved with the game? And I used to lie there in bed as a little lad, and I used to love listening to the match commentaries on the radio in those days, which was the only way, basically. You young whippersnappers won't understand this, but it was the only way you could kind of get any type of coverage of games, because so few matches would go live.
I remember it. I remember.
Yeah, okay. I was just testing the waters.
This filter might be doing me more favors than I think.
But
I definitely remember it. Thanks, bro.
So I would lie there listening to Radio 2, as it was in those days, and they were all Radio City, who was the local commercial station in Liverpool, and you'd hear those European nights on your little transistor radio. I'd gone to bed and I was meant to be asleep, kind of thing, but I'd have it turned down low, just up by my ear, and you heard this crackly sort of descriptive. The description of somewhere like the Stadium of Light, Benfica. I mean, the Benfica one, not the Sunderland one, obviously. But you'd hear these. Peter Jones and Alan Parry were my two favourite commentators, and they were the Radio 2 commentators. And I used to I was enthralled by what they were doing with words, the way they could tell you not just about the game, but where they were and how it sounded and how it looked and how it felt and all the rest of it. I absolutely loved all that bit. And that's when I thought, that's what I want to do. So I formulated a plan from quite early on that would be to work out how I got to this is the same question you just asked me now. How do you get from that point to then actually doing it? So I started to follow through the process. So it meant that when I went at school, well, my dad was an English lecturer anyway, but so I thought, right, well, English is going to be important because that's like words and stuff. And then a bit later on, I kind of started doing a bit of drama, which I really enjoyed anyway. But I also could see that would be useful potentially, because it's words and drama. Those are the two elements, if you like. And then at school, when I was at secondary school, I started to do things that I thought might help me, because I'd worked out by now that I needed to be a journalist to be a football commentator. That was the path in those days. You basically went to work in journalism, and then you expressed a preference for this sort of speciality, if you like, which would be to do football and then to hopefully do commentary. So that was what I then started aiming on, the journalism bit, and I started to put the planks in place to allow me to go and do journalism. So I did things at school that helped me on that basis, like a talking newspaper for the blind in the local area that we used to put together in our school. I used to do the sport for that. So we'd go in early on a Friday morning, and I'd sort of collate a little report for that. And then I got the chance to work for Hospital Radio in Wrexham. So I actually started commentating at the age of probably about 15. They advertised in the local paper saying that they needed new voices, and I went along to speak to them, and they said, yeah, okay, yeah, you can do it. So I started doing Hospital Radio commentaries really early on, which was fantastic. I mean, that was just such a brilliant opportunity that they gave me, because it gave me the chance to kind of make mistakes, to learn and make mistakes without actually really anybody ever really listening. You could never be sure that there was actually anybody tuning in, but you did it anyway. So that was pivotal in terms of it actually gave me a massive advantage, because then when I did finish the university degree, which I'd done in English and drama. So there's those two elements again, all the time playing football all the way through it, knocking around with all the football lads and going to matches in London and all the rest of it. Brilliant. And then when I got to the end of that, I was writing for fanzines and stuff as well. And when I got to the end of that course in London, I'd already applied for a postgrad journalism, broadcast journalism course. So now the plan was beginning to take shape. So I went on the broadcast journalism course in Preston, did a year of that. Before I'd finished that, I'd started freelancing with a local station in Wrexham, who amongst other jobs gave me some football to cover. So I was actually now already getting paid for doing football match coverage. And when I'd finished the course, they kept me on as a freelance. And that's where I got my first match commentary. They decided that they were going to do match commentary on an FA Cup first round tie. They had 3 clubs on their roster. It was Wrexham, Tranmere, and the dreaded Chester, our enemies. But I was going to get if Wrexham were at half time were doing okay in the cup tie looked like it was going to be exciting. That was the one they were going to pick out of the 3. So I was waiting until half time before I knew that I was going to actually be properly commentating now on the radio for real with a co-commentator, a player, a lad called Andy Priest, who went on to have a good career. And so that was me. That was my first 45 minutes experience of proper radio football commentary. So it's ridiculous really, in hindsight, the fact that I'd had the plan, and the plan actually came to fruition in terms of here I am on the radio commentating on a game of football within sort of 6 months of finishing my educational bit. So it happened really quickly. Then there was a bit of a slowdown, because then I went off to Radio Leeds and I did another job for 6 months, which didn't involve any commentary. But I was actually doing match reports under a false name for this commercial radio station who gave me the commentary thing. So I was still keeping my hand in. And then I went to Radio Leeds, asked me to go to interview there. Didn't get the first job. Peter Drury got it. But his card was already marked. So they asked me back for another job, which involved doing news and sport. But they kind of tipped me the nod that if I got in to do that, they would then offer me more sport when the opportunity arose. So I had to bide my time and had to be patient. And I did the whole news reporter thing on the breakfast show at Radio Leeds for quite a long time, and then started to get some games off them. And I was actually commentating on games at night. So I'd do Bradford or Huddersfield, maybe, not the big one, Leeds. And then I would be back home at 11:30 midnight, and then I'd be up at 5:30 the next morning to go in and do the early shift as a news reporter. So I had to kind of show willing, because that's what I wanted to do. So it was quite hard work for a little while actually, but then eventually it had the desired effect. And when the opportunity arose, the Leeds United gig became available. They said, "Do you want to do it?" And I said, "Yes, please." And that was how it kind of then it expanded. Then it became mostly what I did at that point. So that was brilliant. That was mission accomplished in a way. And that again, I'd have been 22 or 23 by the time that came about. So it happened quite quickly.
Absolutely. It's great. It's great to hear a story where somebody had a vision when they were a child to want to be something, and then eventually went off to and achieved it. Because not many people get to achieve their dream. You know, for example, I play music. I have a day job too. Fortunately, music doesn't pay as well as I hoped. But we've gone off, and with the band I play, we've played with guys from Guns N' Roses and Whitesnake and Ozzy Osbourne and so on and so forth. We even played in a place that you might be familiar with. Obviously, you've talked about Wrexham and you've talked about Chester. We played in a famous venue in a place called Buckley. I don't know if you know the
TIV.
The TIV in Buckley, yeah. Hello to Rocky as well, who runs it. We played there a few times. That's a bit of an infamous venue, and the live rooms in Chester as well. We played there too.
I'm not safe to venture into Chester.
No. Cards are marked there, aren't they?
Yeah, very much so.
Here comes the Wrexham fan.
It's the face
thing. So you went on to work for Sky and for BBC, and we'll touch on that in a few minutes. But something I've always been intrigued by is commentators, and they always seem to have that little bit of knowledge about almost every single player. How much preparation goes into match day? Now, obviously, if you're doing a Leeds game this season, you know all about the Leeds team, and you've been talking about them for whatever, over 30 matches this season. But if you're playing a team that you don't necessarily know, they might have made a few new signings, how much preparation goes into that, and how do you keep the conversation flowing?
Well, the prep bit first, I probably do. I don't know. In fact, I've got it to do, in the next 24 hours for the next game that I'll be doing, which will be Brighton. So I will sit down and I will look through. I'll look at, in fact, I've done it already. I've been doing it today. I looked at their last match and just watched some highlights from the last game. If I felt it was important, I might look further back than that to some other games. And then I'll look through the team, the individuals in the team, and I'll do a little bit of a write-up on each and every one of them. Through the full squad. So that'll be what's probably maybe 18 names, 19 names. Not a massive amount, just enough to take me through. And I'll kind of editorialize on the basis of what I think will be relevant in terms of what we're talking about. So if there's a quirky little fact in there, some of the stuff I don't put in. Some of the guys you see, some of the commentators have just got this A4 sheet, which is actually crammed with stuff. It's almost like hieroglyphics. I don't do that, to be honest with you. I don't go to that extent. But I do then go through the fixture as well. What are the ramifications? What's the build-up been? Are there any kind of things attached to this? When was the last time Leeds played at Brighton? When was the last time Leeds won at Brighton? These kinds of things. Are any famous games in the past that might sort of be a subject for conversation in the event, maybe occasionally that there's a bit of a lull? Because actually, really, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the whole statistic thing. I must admit, sometimes some get thrown in front of me when I think that's a bit. We're going to I mean, that Melié's been brilliant this season, but this whole thing about the youngest player to get X 10 clean sheets or whatever.
There's a new one after every game, isn't there? Almost. It seems like
you can invent. Yeah, you can invent a stat for almost any sort of scenario now. You could be the first person with the initials IM to keep 10 sheets in the Premier, in the PL, in the Premier League, or something like that. So people, there are one or two I read, and there's a lot of people out there on social media throwing this stuff up now. Sometimes you go, wow, that's amazing, and other times they go, irrelevant. So I kind of try and sift through to see what I think I might actually genuinely might need to use. So something like for Ben White, for instance, I would look at how many games he played for Leeds, and I might look at how many goals Leeds conceded when he was playing, because there might be some relevance in that in terms of what we talk about during the game at Brighton. So I try and keep it. And the other thing is that I actually still feel, it's a little bit old school perhaps, but I still feel that the absolute priority is to describe what you're seeing in front of you. And that's the game. Now, there is a slightly different aspect to our commentary. You can break this down in two separate ways. Ours is a hybrid commentary on LUTV, because there are people who listen to it as an audio service during the game, who haven't got the pictures to go with it. Wasn't the case last season, but this season it is because of the Premier League rules. But then actually these days, what happens with it is that a lot of the time it now gets used as the commentary that people watch on the visually when they watch the game afterwards. If they've signed up for LUTV and they get access to the full match, then they get the commentary on that. Or even more particularly with the YouTube clipping of stuff now and the club social media accounts when they put the commentary on that. So you do have a slight awareness that the radio commentary is X passes to X, passes to Y, and he's on the right side of the penalty area, and then the ball's crossed into the centre. You have to describe everything because you're telling somebody something they can't see. Yes. That sometimes looks slightly odd when it's actually mixed with something that you can see, because you're now telling somebody something that they already know. So a television commentary is more a kind of it's like decorating around the edges. It's sort of filling in the gaps, because you don't have to describe everything that's happening on a TV commentary, on a visual commentary. Whereas on an audio commentary, you're the eyes and ears for everything, how it looks, what the weather's like, etc., etc. So there are two distinct types of commentary, and this one, the LUTV one, actually falls between the two in a sense. So it makes, and occasionally it becomes quite tricky because, like at Fulham this season and last season, we're watching the game from one side of the ground and the TV gantry is on the other side of the ground. So the pictures on the TV gantry are the opposite of what we're describing. So if I say, goes down the left side, doesn't work in terms of the TV picture that people will see subsequently then. So that adds, that makes things slightly more complicated.
Yeah, it's difficult. A mirror image almost you have to commentate on.
Yeah.
So I've noticed one thing.
Yeah, go on. Well, you kind of have to, you use the stats to kind of drop into little gaps in between, basically. And the good thing with Leeds is the games are generally so entertaining, so much that, and the pace is so high and unrelenting that you don't actually need an awful lot to fill in around the match itself. The match itself is the spectacle. It's the boring ones where you sometimes need a bit more backup when there's not an awful lot to talk about. So I don't do a massive amount of work, but I do some work in terms of the preparation from it. I'll do 2 or 3 hours ahead of each game probably, and that should just about see me through.
Brilliant. One thing I noticed about your coverage on LUTV, no matter who you're doing the co-commentary with, it's always very impartial. It's never totally biased towards Leeds. And I've noticed, I watched, especially last season, I would have watched some of the games on the opposition's TV coverage, because Leeds wouldn't have had the game or whatever stream I could get sometimes. But they were always so biased towards their team, and especially whoever the co-commentator was, and it was just like everything was a penalty for them, and everything was should have been there. But the Leeds commentary and yourselves on LUTV, they're always quite impartial. Obviously, slightly leaning towards the Leeds, but not as much as other channels. Right. So you're sitting down to do a game, right? And you're in the gantry. You've got your microphone or your headset, whatever you're wearing. What's in front of you? You're watching the game. The game is out there. But what have you got in front of you?
I've got an iPad usually, and I've got an A4 pad, folder pad as well. And what I'll have on the iPad is I'll have those notes that I've done, those match notes, event notes, and I'll have the player notes on there as well. Because I've just learned in the last couple of weeks how to split screen on an iPad. It's been kind of revolutionary, man. You're always learning. And then I took my MacBook to do a game the other day because I'd smashed my iPad, and that was sensational what I could do with that in terms of being able to move things around on the screen. Because the other thing I always do is take a picture of the team sheet. When we get the team sheet brought to us, I take a photo of it, take a picture of it, and I put from photos into notes on my iPad. And that's what I use as my instant visual reference not for the Leeds team, but for the opposition. So I'll just blow that up, because as you get into your 50s, your mince pies start going with a short sight vision. So having a nice bright, well, I wear contact lenses, so the long vision is brilliant, but the short term, it's the short vision that's the problem. Ask Tony DeRigo, he's having nightmares with it. So the iPad, because it lights, the screen is lit up. It just, no matter if you're looking in the dark or in daytime, it actually is a big help. So I have, the iPad is crucial to the whole operation. But I also have a paper copy of all that stuff as well. So I'll have printed out those notes, and I'll have printed out my player notes, and I'll have a print out the team sheet as well. So I keep that just in case of any sort of technical issues or as a second reference point. And then apart from that, we have snacks that people may have noticed, because we've introduced a little picnic element to the commentaries this season. So we're all making little contributions on that basis. It's like that bring cakes to work on your birthday thing that people do in proper jobs. And then that'll bottle of water, and that's pretty much it, to be honest with you. Yeah. We have a monitor screen. Usually for home games, we have a monitor screen so we can see the game, which is absolutely crucial, by the way, this year with the ruddy VAR thing. Because we've done a few games this season, away games, where we've not had a monitor screen, and Fulham, I think, was one of them. And it's a nightmare because the game stops and you're more in the dark now than you guys who are watching the game at home potentially. because we haven't got a clue. So we don't even know whether there's a VAR check has started, and we certainly don't know what for. And we didn't have a monitor at Manchester City. I mean, that was at Manchester City, they didn't give us a monitor, and that became crucial with things like the Cooper sending off, because I saw that real time. So I used my own judgment as to what I saw. It was over on the far side, and the point of vision at Manchester City is quite flat. You're kind of looking across the camber of the pitch because you're not that high up in the stand. So it's not ideal looking at a game like that, I'll be honest. So I saw the Cooper challenge, called it as a good tackle in the commentary, as you can hear if you go and look at the highlights. And then was amazed that he got a yellow card, and then was even more amazed when that was upgraded to a red card, and we'd only seen it. That's all we'd seen it that one time. So we had no knowledge to commentate from. So I shouldn't be telling you all this because we were clueless in terms of what had happened. We hadn't got the foggiest idea. And so the VAR thing makes life that much more tricky because the dynamics of the game have changed. The pace of the game has changed. I mean, if you want to talk about commentary, that is the biggest challenge that I faced this season, is commentating with the thought in the back of your head that there's a VAR check possible on everything you do. And if I listen back to spells in commentary now, I've started, I'm pulling back from things because you don't want to give it full beans in terms of calling it as kind of that, because you're anticipating that the thing is then going to get, they're going to raise the flag. Once the ball hits the back of the net, they're going to raise the flag because they don't do it before now. They wait until after. It's pretty confusing, to be honest with you. It's just, you don't know whether to go or whether to stay, sort of thing, in terms of how far you do with the goal commentary.
Yeah, well, we're the same, sitting at home watching it on TV. There's nothing better in a football match than a goal going in, and it's got to the point now. I think we had five consecutive goals chalked off at one point in the season, only a few weeks ago. Some of them rightly so, some of them controversially. But it's got to the point now where a goal goes in, you're kind of, I'll just wait till it goes. And by the time the goal is given, it's kind of like, right, sometimes. So you can't sell it. The best thing about football is jumping up and celebrating your goal. And now you're kind of doing it, and then you're stopping and you're saying, has a flag gone up? So it's a similar thing for the fans now with this VAR.
I mean, it's worse from the fans because I'm getting paid to sit there, so I sit there and I talk. But you guys have paid, considerable sums of money. A few lads have flown in for the weekend or whatever. There's all that bit to go on top of it. You are making a major investment in the experience of going to watch a football match. Now, nobody who's been to watch a football match, when they're partial rather than impartial, can argue that the absolute key moment in that experience is the moment when the ball hits the back of the net. And that you can grade that in terms of, if it's in the first minute, it's great, right up to if it's in the 91st minute, it's the best experience you've ever had in your life. So if you start tinkering with that experience, then you do it at your peril in terms of the experience of watching the game. Because if fans don't know when to celebrate anymore, if you deprive them of the opportunity to literally just go crazy for those few minutes around that event happening, then you're depriving them of one of the major reasons, if not the major reason in many people's eyes, for actually going to the ruddy thing in the first place. So I'm, as you may have gathered, I am not a fan of the VAR, that is, because I've been in that situation. I still play and go and watch Wales play regularly as a fan these days. I go and watch Wrexham when the opportunity arises. I've been in that situation. I know that's what it's all about. As a fan, that moment is what it's all about. And if you don't have that moment anymore, what's the sodding point?
Yeah, 100%. Some players have gone to the extremes of taking their hair out, ponytails, to celebrate,
exactly.
and then finding out afterwards, after doing the whole electric guitar on the side, that the goal was chalked off. And I can relate to that, Bryn.
I'm loving it.
So, co-commentators, right? So you've mentioned TV, Tony DiRigo. How important is a co-commentator for you, and how do you know when to bring them in, or did they just naturally just join in? Is there a talk beforehand that if you notice me struggling, just come in and say something? Or how does the co-commentary work?
Well, nobody will ever notice me struggling, hopefully. You're not meant to notice that bit. I just talk, man.
No, we don't know. It's just to put that out there.
There's sometimes I'll have a conversation if it's somebody who's not done it before. I mean, there's a ruling at Sky, and I did quite a lot of commentating for Sky over the years. And what the rule there is, basically the commentator commentates on the match and the co-commentator commentates on the replays. So all those replays are the territory of the co-commentator. That isn't to say that they don't add their voice to other bits of it as well, but that you can delineate the responsibility kind of on that basis. So it works quite well for Sky. So I would operate the same sort of ruling for me doing it if I was talking to a co-com about how we were going to split this up. The big no is not to talk over each other. So you don't want two voices at once. So there is a sense whereby you both. I mean, Tony's brilliant to work with because Tony's incredibly experienced now. I mean, he's doing this stuff for loads of different people all over the place. You know, he's an absolute top-notch co-commentator, and Tony understands the kind of the peaks, the troughs, the changes of pace, and those sorts of things that you both have to be aware of. So the co-commentator doesn't want to start talking the moment that a ball is played promisingly up to the right-hand side of the penalty area, because he wants to make a point about something else maybe, but now no, the focus has got to be on the game now. And if you listen to Tony, you'll hear him back off occasionally when he's just starting to do something. He'll get out of it quickly because he'll see the way the game's developing, and it's then I'll pick up from that point onwards, sort of thing. So I mean, it's a blessing to be able to work with someone. I had that those years that I had working with Norman Hunter were just unbelievable for me as a commentator, because I learned so much working with him, and by the end of it, we both knew where we stopped and started in terms of the things we said, if you like. And you're almost doing it you are doing it instinctively. So there's just a hopefully at its best, there's kind of a nice natural flow to it. You do get the key moment is the goal moment, obviously, when things start, the moment when things happen. And that's the bit where it's very, very hard to rein back, to keep that rule about just having the one voice. So the co-commentators sometimes do get, naturally get kind of enthused about the whole thing, as you would anticipate and hope that they would, particularly in the case where they're following a club. If it's a neutral commentary, remember we're breaking the commentary thing down again here, because there's telly and there's audio and visual, but there's also club-based, i.e. sort of biased, if you like, as you were mentioning earlier, and neutral. Now, most commentary on TV is neutral, or it was until very recently, and most commentary on radio was probably biased because a lot of it came through local radio stations initially. So there are two different, so you have to be aware of what type of commentary it is you're doing as well, who it's for, who's your audience, whose horse you're riding here. Is it neither, or is it one of the two's watching you? So you have to sort of factor all that kind of stuff into it. Sometimes you've got a co-com who's not quite as strongly connected with a thing. So you might have a Leeds United co-com who played some games for Leeds United, but not for 15 or 20 years, or 250 appearances or whatever. So they've still got a feeling for a connection to it, but they haven't got that sort of super strong bond, if you like. So they're less likely maybe to get to that really excitable stage. But it is just a little, it's something that it's a rapport that you build up over a period of time. And I've been lucky with the LUTV gig. I was very lucky with the Radio Leeds gig as well, to work with some really good people. Really, people who become friends as well through what you do with them. So over the years, I've commentated with Norman Hunter, with Peter Lorimer, with Eddie Gray, with Frank Worthington, with Billy Bremner, to name but five. And then more recently, lots of other guys from the sort of more modern era as well. And it's been an absolute joy, because just watching football with people who know what they're talking about, who understand the game, it's just, it's an absolute privilege. And I've learned, hopefully anyway, an awful lot watching football through their eyes, effectively.
Absolutely. That's some list, by the way. That is
it's
some
all
list.
Right, isn't it?
That's some five-a-side team, I tell you. So I'm going to take it back to just under 10 years ago when I remember going over with the missus, and it was her first time in Elland Road. And we went over to see Leeds and Barnsley, a game we subsequently lost 2-1. 2000, November 2011. The next day, we went into Leeds City Centre to meet Claire's brother, who lives in Sheffield. And we were walking around, my phone rang, and my dad was on the phone. And he asked me if I heard the news. I said, "What news?" He says, "There's a bad news." He says, Gary Speed's dead." And my initial thought, and I've said this to John Newsom a few weeks ago on the podcast, the initial thought was, who's the other Gary Speed I know? That was the first thing popped into my head. I'll never forget it. I just had that kind of awkward moment, and my dad explained what he was after hearing the scene, and I broke out crying on the phone. Not ashamed to say, I'm a huge Gary Speed was my idol growing up. I even tried to run like him and kick the ball like him when I was a small kid. I couldn't believe, and where was I of all places? I was in Leeds, and I hadn't been over for a couple of seasons at that point, and it was mad. I mean, we went down to the Olympic Cafe. I don't know if you know it. Just across from Leeds Market, small little greasy spoon, and you end up having a bite to eat there. And the whole city, there seemed to be a cloud just came over the whole city, and everyone was in mourning. And we went. I said, I need to get back up to Elland Road, and we went up, and I just bought an Ireland flag with the Leeds crest in the middle, and I draped it around the Billy Bremner statue. And for as a fan, as somebody who grew up with Gary as an idol, I just couldn't comprehend it. And one of the standout moments from that few days where it just was just Gary Speed everywhere was your piece on Sky Sports, where you were talking about texting him the day before and then waiting to get the call back when you heard the news about the sick joke. Again, I was watching it earlier and I could feel myself welling up even then, 10 years later. As a friend of Gary Speed, and we asked John Newsom the same question a few weeks ago, and it's not that we want to keep talking about it all the time, but we don't know many people that knows Gary as two Irish Leeds fans. You were one of his buddies. What? How did you feel? It's a stupid question, but
well, yeah. Well, you know the answer. I mean, it was like, I mean, I've been lucky up until recently. I lost my dad a year or so ago, but until that point, I'd lost grandparents, but they were elderly and you know, so, and I was younger and all the rest of it. So that moment of having the call to confirm that what I'd been told about Gary was actually correct, that was like, that was the hardest blow that I'd suffered in terms of, you know, news that you get. And as you get older, it becomes more commonplace, sadly, to hear stuff like that. But that one just absolutely, it was like a, you know, blow to the solar plexus, basically. And I just went home and I did what you did. I just sat and cried and cried and cried and cried for the rest of that day. In between fielding phone calls from pals of mine who knew Gary better than I did in some cases, who were, and everyone just wanted to have the conversation about what, you know, about how the hell did this happen? What's just happened? So it was just a day spent sort of between crying and speaking on the phone, just in complete and utter shock. Initially, you know, you said, do I know another Gary Speed? My thought initially was, okay, heart attack, but, you know, car crash, what we got here. But then to be told, the reporting that he's taken his own life it just added to the sense of utter incomprehension, because it was ridiculous enough as it was. And now to have this suggestion makes it even more ridiculous. So this actually cannot possibly be true, until the point at which I was told it was true. And then, I can't, it's hard to quantify, but it was just a sort of, just fell into a bit of a black hole, really. And and then was also amidst the calls from people who I knew and who knew Gary, was also getting calls from Sky at the same time, and they were making it clear that they wanted me to go and cover this story the following day. So I didn't want to do it, and I made that clear initially, but they kept coming back and asking, telling, whatever. And one of the guys said to me, "Oh, I know you lost a good contact here." And it was like, what? Sorry, what? I lost a good contact.
You actually said that?
Yeah. So it was a bit, that didn't help, if you like. But ultimately, I thought, well, if I don't go and do this, somebody else will go and do it. And I know Gary's mum and dad, and I know that they deserve to have this done, hopefully done right. I'm not going to say done properly, but done right. So it's better that I go and try and do that, because I will put it in the context of this being a family tragedy. A lot of people wanted to talk about football tragedy, but I will always argue that it wasn't really a football tragedy. It's very sad that a very famous, very successful footballer has died. But what is far, 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 far worse is that a father, brother, son had died, no matter what the circumstances. So that was the point that I wanted to go and try and make as strongly as I could. And as it turned out, as often as I could through the course of the day. So I did go and do it, and in some extent, I regret going to do it, to be honest. But there was an element of pressure there to go and do it, and I had my own thing about, I think I should be there, really. So that was, So you come into that little story I told earlier about being that little lad who loved football and listening to the match commentary. That's what I wanted to do, and that's what I ended up doing. But then when I moved to Sky Sports News, this thing, it was more like the news reporter job that I'd had briefly at the BBC and in Cumbria and then in Leeds. And what I never, ever, ever anticipated would be that I'd be standing outside a football ground reporting on the fact that somebody had got to call a friend in football had taken his own life. It was the Wales football manager, and I was the Wales football reporter, and he and I had worked together on Wales games and I never thought I'd be in the position of reporting on. I mean, I was on a similar vein. I was in Istanbul when the two lads got killed before the Galatasaray match. So again, I've gone to cover a football match, and I end up standing outside the stadium all day long, reporting on a murder. So I'm not a football correspondent. I'm a crime correspondent now. I had a kind of similar feeling around the story that you just never want to tell. You just, if you could roll it back, change everything and go back, and it just doesn't happen, then everything would be far, 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 far better. So it was pretty heavy duty, but it was just it was kind of it's one of those the dark episodes. One thing that you would never ever have anticipated and that you'd end up doing. Having said all of that, and the importance of actually talking about it, you asked us before we started whether I minded talking about it. I don't enjoy talking about it at all, but I do think it's important to keep talking about it, and I'll tell you why. Because Roger, Gary's dad, is one of, I think it's now, is it 5 fathers that I know now, all of whom have lost sons to suicide. And that is just ridiculous. I was over in Dublin. I think maybe the last time a gang of us used to go to Dublin, which is one of my favourite cities, by the way. And we used to go on the lash for the weekend, sort of thing. Fantastic. And I just got talking to one of the guys. There were guys who I'd worked with at the BBC previously, and I was talking to one of the guys out there, and he started telling me about his son who'd taken his own life. And I ended up going to watch Bohemians with him that night, and but it was just, that was a kind of as a sort of a diversion from another. I just thought, this is another father who's telling me similar things here, and it's happened again. A very good pal of mine from that I work with at Sky, same thing again, and it's just I mean, this thing is just crazy. So we have to have this conversation, frankly, because What we need to attach to it is the fact that why did this happen, and how the hell do we stop it from happening again? Because that's too many. 5 fathers I know have all lost sons to suicide. It's just, I mean, that's a crazy statistic for me.
Yeah, it
so
really is.
there's a massive amount more needs to be done, and whatever conversation anybody has that leads to somebody doing something more about this, then that has to be an opportunity that I and everybody else has to take.
Absolutely, 100% agree, and very well said, Bryn. I know you said that you regret having to go and do what you've done, and you still kind of regret it now. But from a Leeds fan, from a Gary Speed fan, looking on, it was nice to see somebody that could relate to it, and somebody that was feeling the same things that we were feeling as we were watching it, as opposed to somebody else that might have done it and might have had a bit more of a blank expression and no affiliation with the person at all, or the family. So, you know, on behalf of the Leeds fans, and I don't know if anybody's ever said it, thanks for doing that. Thanks for doing that, and I hope you understand what I mean when I say that.
I do.
So let's move on. And Gary was the Wales are doing really well at the moment. So they're going to be in the Euros. I'm a little bit jealous. Will the Euros even happen? Who knows? All this stuff going. Well, we blew it. Ireland absolutely blew it. I'm in 2 minds as to who to support in it. I think I'll side with North Macedonia and get an Alioski jersey, but I'm not too sure yet. How do you think Wales are going to fare, and what do you think of the goal? There's a bit of controversy at the Wales camp at the moment with the whole gig situation, but how do you think you'll fare on the pitch?
I hope we'll do okay. We'll do really, really, really well if we get anywhere close to emulating 2016, which turned into the best summer of my life. Because that was just, you know, from start to finish, that was just, I was out in France for the duration kind of thing. And it was just, as a fan, wasn't working, and it was just brilliant. It was just superb. So, I mean, it cannot be the same, because I've got tickets for the 2 games in Baku, for instance, the first 2 group games, and I've no idea yet still whether A, I'm going, B, whether I can go, C, if I can go, how do I get there? You know, where do I stay when I get there? I don't know any of these things. So one thing I think we can say without fear of contradiction is that the experience is not anywhere close. And we've got the already semi-finals, so we've got to win this thing to get even close to sort of replicating that. So that isn't going to happen. That's a great shame. But the good thing, and we can have this conversation because I've watched many games. I've watched many Wales Republic of Ireland games, and I've watched quite a lot of Republic of Ireland games as well down the years. You know, as I say, I love going to Dublin. I love going to watch football in Dublin. Enjoy the company of the Irish football supporters. Always, to use the old cliche, great crack and all that. But I can see that what's happened to the football in the Republic of Ireland, at least, is something that happened to football in Wales, where it just it started to drift. And I actually started covering Wales through one of those drift periods, and it was really difficult. You didn't have any sense of where this thing was going to turn round from. And it took, I mean, we'd go back to the Gary Speed conversation. It took the vision of somebody like Gary and the complete change of pace and a change of approach that he introduced to Welsh football when he took the national team job on. It took that to start to produce something completely different. And I can see that reset absolutely it required in probably both the North and the South to an extent, because you've ended up with aging teams. Both of them are aging teams where you've got too many players in their 30s. And the big concern being not anyone like enough coming through below. So Wales went through that transitionary period where they introduced the likes of Ramsey, Bale, who were great players anyway, but also the likes of Gunter and Vokes and Church and King and all the other guys who played really important roles going forward. Maybe not playing at the stellar level of the Bale and the Ramsey, but playing at a good level. But their contribution to the national side was fantastic, and they formed part of that core group that helped bring about that Euro 2016 success. And what they've done is they've stuck with it. As the exciting bit is that we've then brought another group through another young group through who qualified. In some senses, the last qualification was even more exciting than the one prior to that, because this was almost a completely new, very, very young group of players, hardly any of whom were playing regular first team football, but there's some very talented young lads in there. But the key to that success has been getting them into the system, they have this thing called the Welsh Way, and I do a lot of work with the FAW on the coaching badge courses. I do the media stuff on that. So I've seen this process put in place whereby they bring the lads in at the age of sort of 13, 14, and quite often they could be dual qualified or triple qualified, even these days quadruple qualified. But what they do is, once they've got them into the Welsh system, they make it so enjoyable, and they put them together as such tight groups that they stay in the system all the way through, even when other countries come calling, in particular England. So David Brooks had the opportunity to go and play for England at the under-19s tournament in Toulon, but then came straight back months later or 6 weeks later or whatever, and played for Welsh under-21s, and then said, no, I'm playing for Wales. So they've given him the opportunity to go off and do stuff with other countries. So it's like reverse Declan Rice, if you like, is that the Welsh thing is what they enjoy. And so the system that has been put in place has been so successful in just getting these lads into the right mindset that this is what they want to do. They teach them the anthem. That was one of Gary's big ideas, teaching the anthem very early on. So some of these lads have barely even visited Wales, frankly, because they're coming in on a parent or sometimes even a grandparent thing. But when they get them into the group, they teach them history. They teach them about the history of Wales. They talk about stuff like that. They learn the anthem. So they get a sense So they get a sense of what it is that they're representing here. They have a good idea about who it is and what it is. And it's been incredibly successful. So we've got a great conveyor belt going now.
So do you agree that the structure of the Welsh national team started at the underage levels, and it took that long to build it up to the point where it was affecting the first team players and professional players?
No question.
Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that leads me into a great point, and I think Wales in that sense could be a great blueprint for the FAI to follow over here, because at the moment the structure of Irish football has completely transformed in recent years. I myself coach at a club, Belvedere. We produce players like Matt Doherty and Troy Parrott, a lot of players that that you've commentated on. And the League of Ireland have come in. There's the director of football in the FAI, a Dutch guy called Ruud Doctor. I don't know if you ever heard of him. But he's come over here and he's tried to change the structure of the football. And in theory, it works in Holland, where you have only football as your main field sport. Over here, you got 4 sports to contend with. You've got your football. You've also got Gaelic football. You've got hurling, and you've got rugby. And the numbers just don't add up. And it's affected, in my opinion, it's affected the progression of children going from schoolboy football over onto professional contracts in England, because the League of Ireland have now taken control of the best players from under 13s upwards, which means that the clubs in the grassroots levels, like ourselves and other clubs, don't get the financial reward that they once got when a player went over and signed at 15 and went over in a professional contract over. Also, coaches the really good schoolboy coaches over here are losing the enthusiasm because they're producing all these players. They're out on wet nights on a Tuesday, or Wednesday, or Thursday, or whatever. They're putting all the work in, and when they get to 13, the best players are going yoink, 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 yoink. You're left with nothing at the end of it. And in my opinion, we could take a leaf out of Wales' book and just scrap that. Go back to it. Maybe go to under 17s, under 16s, under 17s, League of Ireland. But those clubs, it's essential for them to be producing the players from young age in order to get them to the level where your Gary Kelly's came from, your Ian Harts, even your Johnny Gileses, if you want to go back that far. That's the system they came through. But the Irish first team at the moment, they're suffering, in my opinion, because the coaching isn't there. And the main priority with coaches at our club is to improve the player, not to win tournaments, not to make money off them. In a sense, that is an important cog in the wheel. But if you're to talk to any of the best schoolboy coaches in Ireland, the main thing for them is improve the player. Improve. But at the moment, I just think that's gone out the window in Irish football. And I don't see, if it doesn't change soon, I don't see Ireland getting back anywhere near to the kind of success we had under McCarthy or Jack Charlton.
Well, the big advantage in Wales, obviously, that there is a difference in Wales because you've got the English border, and players can cross that border and go and work in really good academies. Let's not kid ourselves. There's not many coming through from the Welsh system. However, having said that, we've had Cardiff and Swansea in the Premier League in a successive sort of in periods whereby one's gone in, the other's come out. And that's been hugely important because that's allowed both clubs to use that Premier League money to invest in their academy setups. And both Swansea and Cardiff are now producing a lot of young players. And that is an advantage that is denied to clubs in the League of Ireland, obviously, because the financial clout just isn't there to make that big investment in very good academy structures. So if you look at the number of players who've come through Swansea, who are in the Welsh national team now and in the Welsh national setup, and now Cardiff have gone through a lull, but they're now, I've got a good friend working in the academy at Cardiff now, and he's telling me that they've got a few coming through their Welsh qualified lads who are looking highly, highly promising. So they are now getting that thing going again. They're now sort of getting people in there who looks like may well make it all the way through. And you've got the pathway that you can offer players. Even the English lads who may be at the Villa Academy or the Arsenal Academy or wherever they might be will look up how quickly they could be a Welsh senior international. I mean, it could be, if they're 16, it could be within the next 12 months. You might actually be playing the seniors. So you can see the end to this particular, to this decision that you make to say, right, well, I'm not going to play for England. I want to play for Wales, because you very quickly can find yourself as part of the senior team squad. And that's what's happened with a load of young lads that we've got in there now, who are now playing international matches and football. And that's something that's going to be a bit more it's going to be a bit more difficult to replicate that, frankly, just geographically in the Republic in particular, because you've just got the advantage of having access to those English academy lads. I mean, you've got obviously loads of Irish lads in there, so you've got to get them. I suppose the challenge in Ireland, is to create that system they've created in Wales when you get them into the international camps. So it's less about what happens at the clubs and more about what happens at the international camp. When you get them in the international camps, that's when you get them into the system, and that's when you convince them that this is where their future lies, and you get them to buy into it. So it feels like a club. That group of players that Wales took to the Euros, they've been together. Brian Flynn did a fantastic job in finding those players. Hal Robson-Kanu, I mean, you look at that name and you think, can't possibly be a Welsh connection there. But he did his homework. He found out there was. He was in the English system. He lured him out of the English system because he wasn't happy. And then he's the guy who scores the goal against Belgium in the quarterfinals, So
there you go.
That's the end of that process. But what they did with that group was they created a team mentality, a club mentality, because you've got these lads, and that's what they're able to do now all the way through the age groups. They stay together in the age groups. So by the time they reach 21 seniors, these lads have been playing together for years. They love each other. They're mates.
Yeah.
And that's what you need. If you haven't got men, if you haven't got the size of talent pool, you need something else in international football. You need to take other advantages, and that's small nation advantages to create something that the players buy into.
Absolutely. On that note, next time you're talking to Patrick Bamford, just remind him he has Irish connections, will you? And tell him don't be waiting for the England call. We're waiting for him over here. Come on over, Pat.
That'll be Paddy Bamford then, will it? Yeah. Paddy Bamford.
Maybe Paddy Bamford. Yeah, that's what we call him already. So we have Brighton on Saturday. An unorthodox, it seems, this season. 3:00 kickoff on a Saturday, which is great traditionally. Team news came out today from Marcelo to say that Rafinha was still out. Obviously, Cooper serving the last game of his ban, and Rodrigo was a possibility to come into the squad, not a guarantee. How do you think we'll fare out? We lost 1-0 the last time. Mope goal, bit of sloppy defending, Luke Ayling ball watching. Probably unlucky not to get something out of that game in the end. How do you think things will fare out on Saturday?
I quite fancy Leeds, to be honest with you, because I just think I watched some of that Brighton Sheffield United game, and they're not on a great run. They're not out the woods in terms of completely out the woods. They aren't going to go down, in all honesty. But the fact that they still have a lingering doubt suggests that theirs hasn't been the best season, frankly, because the three teams at the bottom have been demonstrably the worst three teams in the league this year. And that's almost been from the get-go, hasn't it? So the fact that Brighton have not managed to pull away from that situation suggests that they've got some problems of their own there. I just fancy Leeds now. I actually fancy Leeds to finish well. I may pay for this statement, but I think Leeds could finish well because they've done the heavy lifting now. The job that was required to be done has very much definitely been done. But the one thing that you can guarantee is there'll be no slack off. They've removed the pressure in terms of, in a sense, it doesn't matter, but they won't. The players will keep going for it. And in the midst of that, they've created this new defensive unit that I thought was just fantastic against Man City and Man United and Liverpool. Largely, not quite so much against Liverpool, but against Man United, I thought they were fantastic. And you've got Llorente, who's now looks a proper player. And
absolutely.
You've got Struijk, who's been an absolute revelation in that central defensive position.
What an improvement he's made since the start of the season, Pascal Struijk.
Well, I mean, he's a young guy who barely played any football before he was put into the starting 11 at Anfield, first game of the season. So he just looks a fantastic, I wouldn't even say prospect because he's already doing the thing now. But so that defensively, they look okay, I think, now. And strangely, bizarrely, after the early season, loads of goals going in at both ends. Now that the trick appears to be actually they're not scoring as many at the other end. So maybe something is given a little bit in terms of the pragmatism there. But I think an away game against Brighton will offer opportunity for a bit of counter-attacking football of the type that Leeds like. And I've got quite a good vibe for it. It doesn't matter now. I never make predictions, frankly, anyway, because I'm useless at it. But I just think, in general, I think Leeds could finish well. I think Leeds, if I were them, I'd be aiming for the 54 points that Sheffield United got last year as an easy target to go for initially. And then if they get past that, see how you can finish, because there's, £3 million on every position as well. So I quite fancy Leeds this weekend. I do.
Yeah, likewise. I have to agree with you. I think the fitness levels of Diego Llorente improving and playing consecutive games has really benefited us. I think we look a lot more solid at the back, especially people are still commenting on how poor we are at set pieces, but I think the set pieces have improved dramatically since Llorente has come in. Obviously, you can see Patrick Bamford's being asked to come back in and defend corners. He gets his head on quite a few of them. Meslier, you can see his instructions have changed over the course of the season. He's been told to come out and punch a little bit more. So we are defending far better. Like, if you look at that Man United game the other day, Luke Galen was outstanding. The two centre-backs, fantastic. Alioski had a pretty decent game. And Calvin Phillips, totally, as we said at the start of the season, had Bruno Fernandes in his pocket. You're talking about one of the best players in Europe, or so many people regard him as, but Calvin Phillips was absolutely outstanding. So you can see a maturity, a huge maturity that Leeds have shown since the start of the season to now, especially defensively. I think if we get an even balance of really good at the back and get back to scoring goals as much as we were early in the season, I think we could be a real force to be reckoned with next season. And we're going to bring players in. So we're going to strengthen. So other people saying, you could do a Sheffield United, mostly fans of other teams. I don't think we will. I think we'll push on more so. But I suppose the second season, the most important thing is to stay up again and be able to challenge for a third season. But I think we'll be better than that.
Well, the big signing to make is Marcelo Bielsa still, because keep him involved. And
the most important part.
Then the prospects and the potential is quite. I was excited at the end of the Man United game because I thought there were key attacking players missing. But if you've now got such a strong defensive unit with competition for places as well, that bit is been the problematic bit in the higher division. If you've now addressed that issue, and he was making pragmatic substitutions as well, when Koch comes on for Tyler Roberts, that's to do a certain type of job kind of thing. So everybody's learning. That's been utterly one of the most enjoyable bits of the season, is watching Leeds United learning, and not only watching the players learning, but also watching Marcelo Bielsa learning as well. Because he would tell you that he doesn't know everything, so he's still learning what this Premier League thing's about. But if you can put that defensive unit together there'll be more signings, as you say. I think there'll be probably a new striker coming in just to put competition up there that it doesn't currently exist on Patrick's shoulders, and then to add what Rafinha's brought in to do that again. and to have 2 or 3 options of that kind there, that if you've got that attacking element to it, then you've got, I think should have quite a good team, to say the least, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So I would be quite excited at the prospects for next season. I don't easily get excited, but I do. I'm excited about. I just enjoy watching Leeds because when all said and done, I like football. I love football, and that sounds a fairly obvious thing. But some people follow their club, and I have a club that I follow, and but I love watching football, and I love watching good football. And what we're seeing at Leeds is an absolute treat in terms of the standard of football that we're watching. So, 100%. we should enjoy every minute of that, because it's not just largely winning football, but it's winning football. It's just with style and panache and quality, but absolute total application at the same time as well. You couldn't really ask for any more, frankly.
100%. On that note, it's probably nearly time to wrap things up, but I would love to hear 2 things from you. From all the games you've commentated at Leeds, especially over the last almost 2 seasons now, what has been your standout game? What was the game? And also, what is your favourite goal that you've commentated on with Leeds over the last 2 seasons?
The favourite goal, well, I'll answer the second one first. I suppose I've got to say the Pablo Hernandez goal at Swansea. Have I?
Swansea, yeah.
That's probably the one that had the biggest impact. Let's put it that way. And when you get somebody, the bit I enjoyed most in the aftermath of all of that was when some guy in Argentinian TV ran the clip of the commentary, and some comment was made to say that this commentator's madder than El Loco and Marcelo Bielsa. And at that point I thought, well, that's probably the best compliment I've ever had. I'm not sure it's entirely true, but it's the best compliment I've ever had. But then you get some sort of sense of how big this thing is, because I knew how big the Premier League is, because I've been working for Sky for many, many years, whilst Leeds have been in the doldrums effectively. So I've been telling people in Leeds, this Premier League thing's massive now, much bigger than when Leeds were last in it. And that was the first taste of it, because that game got, because there's so much interest in South America and stuff, that game kind of got picked up. So and because of what it meant to everybody, that moment, not my commentary, the goal, the moment, that was the moment that many Leeds fans had waited those 16 years for, frankly. So it was such the big thing for that was it was such a privilege for me to be not the only person describing it, but certainly in a position whereby that was used quite significantly. The fact that I was able to be there to do that was a fantastic privilege. In terms of everything that I've done, and I've been very lucky with the career I've had, obviously. But that's one of those absolute stand-up moments, because you sit back then and you go, Jesus, I'm a lucky guy, because I was given the chance to be here when that happened. And not only that, but I was given the chance to describe this thing happening to many people as well. Yeah.
And you are part of the Leeds United. You become a part of the Leeds United history with that as well. That's a goal that's going to be shown for years and years and years and years and years to come. That essentially last season was the most memorable. Probably what Stuart Dallas's second goal against Man City was this season, equally as important. I thought you were going to say one of the two there. Or arguably Luke Ayling's goal against Huddersfield as well, the volley. That was a beauty.
Yeah, I mean, I've been absolutely spoiled. I came into this at the start of last season. I didn't have to I was at the playoff disaster, but I didn't have to commentate on it, thank God. And it's only been good times since. I mean, this is just, impressive.
You should have come in and done it years ago.
Yeah, but it just wouldn't have worked, would it? Because timing up until this point, timing has never been one of my strong points. I left Leeds when they were just about to do the whole Champions League thing to go to Sky, who weren't covering the Champions League at the time. So, timing and all that. But the timing's been quite good on this one. So I've just been so lucky to be in the midst of this thing that's happened in the last 18 months or so. So those moments, I love the Dallas goal at Manchester City as well. I loved it for Tony DeRigo's reaction as much as anything, because
the scream that he done after
the scream, yeah. but in terms of Leeds go to Manchester City and hold on with 10 and then win the game in the last minute, that's one of those scenarios we talked about a while ago about that's what you go for, isn't it? So but there's been, in terms of the games themselves, there've been some belting games, but Leeds have tended to win most of the games comfortably. But I guess So something like the comeback against Millwall last season, which was actually important.
Was that?
Yeah. Well, I was sitting there at half time on the gantry there, and people won't maybe be aware of how important it was that Leeds got promoted last season. I know that sounds obvious, but you know, as you've seen in terms of the figures that have been published recently, the club has been losing quite big sums of money because they've been speculating to make sure that they try and get to that top division. So they've pumped money in. The owners have pumped money in to make sure that they try and make that happen. But they got to a point, I think it's fair to say, towards the end of last season, where they realised that this was not really maybe sustainable on the level of investment that they were at. So it was now or never to some extent. And I think there was a sense within the football club, the wider football club, that this was very, very important now that Leeds United got promoted. So there's elements of that, in a sense, in the Pablo Hernandez commentary, because you're thinking about people's livelihoods here as well. You know, that there's a lot riding on this now, on Leeds getting up. So conversely, at half-time in that game against Millwall at Ellen Road, when Leeds are 2 down, and in the midst of a bit of a wobble there as well, that sort of mid-season wobble thing, and I'm thinking, oh Jesus, I can't believe this. You know, they're going to blow it. They're going to blow it here, aren't they? You know, and you'd heard all that sort of Bielsa burnout stuff and all the rest of it. They're going to blow it here. They're 2 down at home to Millwall, and then so the comeback was just so much of a boost than it even deserved to be, because it was like, whoa, no, okay, hold on, everything's back on track. We're all right here. It's going to be okay, people. So
that was a Tuesday night. That was the Tuesday night game. I know I went to Ellen Road on my own. I didn't have a hotel. I flew in that afternoon. We flight back out was like 5:30 the next morning. And at half time, it was freezing cold from Ellen Road. At half time, I went out and rang my dad. He was watching it on TV. Said, "What am I doing here?" Out of all the matches to pick, I said, "We're getting absolutely." And then I rang him back after the match, of course, over the moon. You know, we went back top of the league, I think, after that game. So that was definitely a big standout game. Go on, you were talking there before I interrupted you, making the co-commentators golden rule of talking over somebody. Go back to where you were talking. I'm sacked before I get a job. Jeff, are you saving on the electricity there, are you?
Yeah, basically, I don't know. It's just I need to turn the light.
Yeah, that helped, Jeff. You can't see you, like.
Sorry about that.
Oh, welcome back, Jeff.
I just noticed it's getting a bit dark, and then I realised I need to turn the light on, but I didn't want to interrupt.
Are you lads still getting those power cuts over there then, are you?
Oh,
yeah. He's not paying his bills, man.
Yeah.
So I suppose we better wrap it up, or we'll be talking all night, Bryn. On behalf of myself and Jeff, thanks very much for coming on to the Bielsa Ball podcast. It's been a pleasure. Sometimes it's just so easy to talk to people, you don't even feel the time passing by. Well, Jeff, it was bright when Jeff started, and now he's sitting in the dark.
There, now it's light.
Time's after flying. Bryn, thanks very much for coming on. Good luck with the rest of the season commentating, and I hope you're doing it on LUTV for many years to come.
Thanks, fellas. I've really enjoyed it. So thanks for having me on.
Brilliant. Okay, listen, take care of yourself.
And you too, guys.
Bye.